is?
Well, this is July 2nd, 2015, right?
Yeah.
And I'm Scally O'Donnell.
Okay, Scally. Would you start out by telling us your family story of how your family got to Grand Lake and when and why?
Well, my
And
grandfather, yeah, my grandfather and his wife started coming here in around 1892, and they built 2 tent floors, and one was a cook tent and had big tents on them with a wooden floor, and one was a cook tent and the other was a sleeping tent. And then when the kids got old enough, they slept outside, and then they built our house over here on Grand Lake in 1898, and the logs came from one of the abandoned mining towns up in the park. And I claim, and I don't have any basis for this, but that my granddad bought an old boarding house and took it down and brought the logs down and built our house here in 1898. And when they came, they came by horse and wagon. Took 3 days. First day at Floyd Hill, second day at Empire, then at Winter Park, roughly, and then Grand Lake. And
And the children were in the family. Who were the children?
his children?
Yes.
Well, my mother, Dorothy Bryant, and then her brother Rout Bryant and her sister Minnie Bryant.
And your grandparents' names were?
Harry Bryant, W.H. Bryant, who organized the yacht club, along with a couple of other guys, and then he was Commodore from 1903 or until he died, really. 1914 he died. And they brought the first really purchased sailboat up here. I can't remember now what year, but about 1905. And
Before that, sailboats were
rowboats with a
with
little mast and some old sheets or something for
Whatever
sails.
possessed him to bring a purchased sailboat up here, you think?
Well, he wanted to sail and he wanted to make Grand Lake the big yachting capital of the West, you know. And,
Had he had experience in
No.
sailing other places?
no, but he traveled to New York frequently on business and became familiar with the New York Yacht Club, and that's how he found out where good boat builders were. And the boat that he brought was built in Racine, Wisconsin, and by a Hirschoff, which was a pretty famous, well-known boat builder. And that boat, compared to today, it was just a big hulk, you know, because it had a bowsprit, had a gaff rig, and a huge centerboard, and a huge rudder. And I have the rudder down here in front of the house with our address on it. You can't read it because I forget to paint it. But at any rate, it was quite a boat. That boat, they wanted. There was a tradition in the yacht club when boats got old. They on Venetian night they towed them around and filled them full of pine boughs and soaked them with gasoline and then lit them on fire. And so they took 2 boats this one night. The Dorothy, which was Harry Bryant's first boat. This was 1940, and so they took these 2 boats out and they were going to burn them, but the Dorothy sank before they could burn it because it had been sitting drying out for 2-3
How long do you
years.
think that tradition went on?
I don't know, because I never saw it except that time in 1940, and I don't know of any other boat that was burned like that in my time.
What did it take to haul that first boat up here?
Oh man,
How'd they get it up here?
A lot of with horse and wagon because there was no railroad. the railroad, to my knowledge, finally got to Winter Park at least by 1905. And I have a diary here of Harry Bryant's that he wrote in sporadically. But in 1905 he gave quite some details, because the train then went over the top of Rollins Pass, and also known as Corona Pass, and then stopped at Arrowhead, which is really Winter Park. And if you ski the trails at Winter Park, they all have those old names. Arrowhead is one of the trails. And at any rate, he says that they left Denver on the train at 9 a.m. and got to Arrowhead, and then a Cairns brought a wagon over, and they got to Grand Lake at 10 p.m. And his remark was that the women and children were slightly fatigued. Or a little fatigued or something. And you know, we complain now if it takes more than 2 hours to get to Denver. But that was a long day.
Let's see. Okay, fast forward to your first memories of Grand Lake.
Really, the year that I remember best is 1940, when I was 10, and I'll explain that with a long story that I heard 150 times from my dad. That in the early 30s, my mother and 4 children would come up here about after school was out and stay the summer, and then he would commute on weekends. But in those days, men worked until noon on Saturday, and there was no telephone, so my mother would go to town on Friday probably and give him his instructions. Pick up the laundry, get a cake at Bowers, pick up Dorothy's friend Helen, and so by the time he did that and drove up here, it was 5 or 6 o'clock, dusty roads. And then he had to get ice out of our ice house. He had to start the pump, which was down on the beach, that pumped water out of Grand Lake into a tank, untreated, above the house, and it lasted a week, the tank did. And then he had to probably chop some wood. And then it was 7 or 8 o'clock when he could finally have a whiskey. Then he had to start back Sunday. So he got tired of that. And so in at least 1936, 7, 8, maybe 9, they rented the house here and rented a house in Buffalo Creek, which is on the South Platte River, really. And he could get there in an hour and a half compared to 5 hours. And he could even come up Wednesday night sometimes. So he liked that a lot. So anyway, then we came here in 1940 and had a big remodel project going on the house. And that's when my first real memories are. I don't remember a lot before that.
Of what? Did you sail at that point?
No. No. We didn't have a boat. And the first time, well, my mother died then in the spring of 41. And so that was her last year. Summer here was 1940. And I came up with my sisters, or at least one of them, around Regatta Week in 1941, just for a few days. And Tom Camel had a dinghy that sat over on their beach, and it was a great boat. I later saw the same kind of boats in Hong Kong when I was in the Navy, but at any rate, he invited me to sail it in a Hofstra race the next day. And I had never sailed before.
And you were 11 at this point.
Just turning 11. And so I went over there the next morning all excited, bailed it out, and then Don Camel came down and helped me push it off and gave me lessons from the shore. push the rudder this way, or the tiller. And then they told me to start on the half-hour gun in the Hostot race. So I went out, no life jacket, and nobody had a life jacket. So I started sailing the thing down the old course, what we now call the old course. And I thought, boy, I'm going to do great. Well, finally about 5 o'clock in the afternoon, I was still out there. And the only boat that was with me was Stanley Brandenburg, who had the house that the Thomases later had, and I don't know who owns it now. People from Vail. But at any rate, grab that. Thank you.
Bills.
So Stanley Brandenburg and John O'Connor and I don't know who else were in this boat, and they had a little whiskey with them. And heard a lot. Huh? No, they were in the other boat. I was just watching them. And my sister sent my brother out to try to make me quit and come home, and I didn't want to do it, so I finished. But that was my first sailing experience.
And then, how did you progress into sailing? At what point did you get a boat? And
well, not until well after the war, because see, that was 41, and then the war started on December 7th, and we weren't around here much even then. You know, my dad went back in the Army. He'd been in the Army in World War I and went back in, and so we were just kind of doing whatever we could and didn't get up here much at all. And then I came up here and worked at the boat service in 1946, the year I turned 16. I was just telling you, 7 days a week, kind of sun up to sundown, and lived above the shop. At that time they had a mechanic, and the mechanic's wife cooked, and so I got room and board and $75 a month, and I thought I was in heaven, and it was just fun. And the other people working there were veterans just coming back from the war, and I was just turning 16, and I learned a lot. And you know, it was a different world then. You go up to the Pine Cone and probably had a beer there. And it's just a different world. And so not so many rules. We have today rules. But so then anyway, then, you know, my summers after that, I went to college in the Navy. I had a Navy scholarship, and I had to go to sea every summer. So I was here very little, maybe for a few days between the end of the summer and the start of school. And then I was, after that, 4 years of college and then 3 years of active duty in the Navy. And then I got married in 1956, and about 57, my brother-in-law Jack O'Ryan and my brother Bryant and I decided we ought to look at a sailboat. And the Peaks had one for sale. We went down there in an outboard and looked at it, and we were driving back, and I guess Don Camel said, "What's going on?" And we told him, and he said, "Well, you want to buy the Fitzgerald?" We said, "How much?" And so we bought it, and Ann and I had just purchased our first home in Denver, and we didn't have any furniture except for a little den. And so we got home and up here and said we'd bought a boat, and she said, "We don't have any furniture." And I said, "Well, you can sit on a boat, but you can't sail a couch." So anyway, that was the Fitzgerald. It was our first boat, and we sailed that for probably 7 or 8 years, and then I bought a boat from Johnson, and a new E from Johnson, wooden E, and it didn't last but about 2 years. It had some defects in it. I took it back and bought another one from him, the Sandpiper, which was the last wooden boat that I had. And I sold it to a guy named Chubb several years later. But I loved that boat, and I would turn it over every spring and sand the bottom and put a new coat of varnish on it.
Was that an E-Scow?
E-Scow, yeah. And it was a good boat. I won a couple of races with it.
Did anybody particularly mentor you in sailing or
No.
teach you to sail? You just got out there
We
and
just
did
did it. But, you know, we sailed just because we loved to sail. And I'd get up here Friday night from work, and if the wind was blowing, we were on the boat. And I'd go yell at Stoddard White or somebody and get a crew, and away we'd go. And my sister Dorothy loved to sail just as much as I. And so we were out sailing whenever there was a wind, and particularly if there was an east wind. We just really liked that. And so we sailed a lot just for fun, and not to really practice so much or compete as much as just to enjoy it. We really did have fun.
Do you have a favorite memory, sailing memory? Could be a catastrophe or could be just a fun day. Or
Well, I can remember one day Dorothy and Jack, her husband, the three of us were leading a race by a lot, and it turned into a drifter, and we were sitting over there roughly off of the channel, say, and headed from E to the yacht club, and just sitting there on the low side because there was no wind, and all of a sudden a gust hit us and dumped us. Yeah. And you know, we got the boat back up and still won the race. And the probably one memory that is good is that we were sailing later. I can't remember which boat now. I've had four new E's that I've bought, and over the years, but one race started at the down by Peaks at what's now the P buoy, and big wind had been blowing, and then it stopped, and we started, just got across the starting line, and my son Bruce said, "Dad, watch out," and this huge blast of wind came down the east inlet, so an east wind. And we were up at the north end of the starting line and saw this wind coming. So the other guys had set a spinnaker right fast, and we just roaring down there. And Rick Schaefer roared past me in his boat with his spinnaker up, and then capsized right in front of us. And we ran right over his mast and cut his sail. And he was mad for a while, but I couldn't do anything about it. And we were the only boat that stayed up, and primarily because we didn't have our chute up. And so that was a great fun there. And Rick and I talked about it a lot.
Well, I was sailing with my father on his M20 that day at the same spot. We did not go over, but it's because we basically luffed the sails, and that's when I met the Peaks. The LS, they put us up and warmed us by the fire, but we just went right up on the... You were busy doing your things, and it might have been different starts, but it was scary.
Oh yeah, well, there have been a lot of those times when there are a lot of boats down there. And,
what years were you Commodore Scally?
well, I think around 75 and 6, something like that.
Now, are you the only family with 3 generations of Commodores, or
3.
Your grandfather, you, and your son?
Yeah, and my brother and brother-in-law. They've all been
That's right.
Commodores.
So, there's probably a record in there.
I don't know about
think.
that. You got 2 generations of Sutherlands. Peaks, too. I guess that's right.
Yeah.
What about Camel?
Yeah, sure, Camel, because, yeah, Richard and Don and Richard and then old Richard, yeah. Richard, there's a lot of Richard Crawford Camels.
What was the biggest challenge you had to address while you were Commodore, and what was the outcome? What was the challenge of those years?
Well, I think, say during the time that that I was in the sequence, the 3 Commodore, 6 years, we did a lot to change the sailing courses. Both before I got involved as Commodore, and then during, and maybe even a little after. For so many years we had all sailed what's now known as the old course. It's the same course, it never changed. It always started in front of the yacht club regardless of the wind. Could be a west wind, east wind, didn't matter. And then we started to think about windward starts. And one story that I can remember, well, there's a story I tell, and I'm embarrassed about it because it sounds like I'm bragging, but I was winning the cup frequently, and so my brother and
As in the Lipton Cup.
yeah, and my brother was either past Commodore or rear Commodore or something, and J Man was the Commodore, and they decided that I couldn't sail anymore. I had to be the fleet captain and run the races that year. And so that was okay. I didn't really object. And so Jack Ryan and I decided we were trying to get windward starts and change the course. So we started a race, and I stood on Alligator Rock with a cannon. And he was out in a little boat that the Lynches owned, the Tin Can. Do you remember that? And that was the one mark, and me standing on Alligator Rock was the other for the starting line. And I shot the cannon off this Alligator Rock. And so that was probably sometime around 1970, 71 in there. And that was just part of our effort to get windward starts. And now we do a much better job because we're doing all windward leeward races. And still in those days we did triangles, and which was the way the America's Cup was done, and races on the big lakes in the Midwest. And so now everybody does just the windward leeward races.
So is that kind of the legacy of your Commodore years? I mean, whether people realize that or not, that was a big change.
Yeah, big change. And the only other problem we had was the same one that's existed forever, and that's the kids getting into the booze. And we had some big problems then. There was some boys after midnight on the Commodore's ball, ended up in the lake, flipped a boat somehow, and had to go get them.
You know, when I videoed Tim O'Connor, he talked about the disappearance of the cannon that you just mentioned. Do you have any?
I don't know that story.
Oh.
I'm sorry. If I knew it, I'd forgotten it.
I think you need to ask Don Chubb that story.
Oh, okay. Okay.
You know, speaking of things that you remember about sailing, is that in those days when we were sailing the Fitzgerald, we sailed against E's and D's. We're all in the same class, and so Don Chubb in a D and I tied, and we had to have a sail off, and so we sailed off the last afternoon, and it was really blowing hard, and with the wind blowing that hard, the D just didn't have a chance to
I
stay.
remember
It couldn't stay up. I mean, couldn't keep up with us. If it had been a drifter, they would have. But gee, we sailed against several Ds, and then even an M20. Dick Camel bought an M20. I can remember a meeting of the yacht club, I guess, the whole club, big discussion about the E fleet. And Dick Camel said the E fleet on Grand Lake is a dying fleet. And nobody should buy any more E's. Now I think we got 14 of them up here. And they're still the greatest boat going. I think if I were 20 or 25 years old today, though, I'd have an M16. And the biggest reason for that is that, number one, it's a good boat. Number two, it only takes two of you to sail it. And getting a crew together for an E-boat continues to be a problem.
How has sailing changed here, let's say, since your Commodore years? How has sailing in general changed?
Well, I think, number one, the courses have changed. The boats are much superior. When I going back to the Fitzgerald at least, and maybe even the others, we didn't have spinnakers. Spinnakers weren't allowed on Grand Lake until sometime in the late 60s or early 70s.
Was that a rule in the yacht club?
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Oh. And the boats weren't even purchased for spinnakers. They weren't built if they were coming here. You know, just to show you the difference, and I keep thinking of other things, so excuse me, but I went to the Nationals one time with a boat from here. Jim Lynch and Jim Munn were my crew, and we had a good time. But we went to Lake Winnebago, Oshkosh, Wisconsin. The little Winnebago's about 12 feet deep, and it's just a few miles, like 4 or 5 miles from Lake Michigan. And when the wind blew in off Lake Michigan, the waves were like you're on the ocean. And we didn't have bailers. And we didn't even have a good splashboard. So the day, that's a fun story, because we got there a day early, and it was a bluebird day, just gorgeous, and we went out sailing, and oh man, we were having fun, and we started speculating on at what place in the regatta the Nationals would we finish, and it kept getting better by the hours. And so anyway, then the next day, the wind came from the other direction, and we had these monster waves and water coming in the boat, and we had a pump. And so I would have Lynch, I'd say, pump, and then I'd say hike, and he said, well, which one do you want me to do? And so that night, they had a dinner for all the sailors, and some guy came by and asked me how I did that day, and I said, well, we had a hell of a time keeping the boat pumped out. And he said, well, what about your bailers? And I said, we don't have bailers. He said, you know, you guys from Grand Lake, you try to give us a lot of baloney. And he said, there's no way you wouldn't have sunk if you didn't have bailers. And I told him about Lynch. And Lynch was a good pumper.
Now, were those guys, did they crew for you a lot? Did you have a particular crew that was kind of a sweet spot crew for you?
Oh, those guys had their own boats. And so we just put this together to go to the Nationals. Yeah. And we, I can remember that we were getting the boat ready on Labor Day, and we didn't have numbers on the deck, and you had to have your sail number on the deck of the boat. So we got the boat out of the water and on a trailer, and had Jane Lynch painting the numbers and it was snowing. And we were headed to Wisconsin. So No, my crew for so many years consisted of Dorothy on the jib, and then whomever else I could get to crew. You know, in the early days it was Jack O'Ryan, and then he left the scene, and it was just others, and finally my kids, you know, and Bruce and John. I gotta tell the other great sailing story that hasn't been repeated is that I towed John behind water skis with our E-boat. And I have a picture.
How old was he?
He was probably 16, probably weighed about 140, which is a long way from where he is now. And we had seen in the E magazine, somebody had done it in Michigan, on Crystal Lake, I think. And so we always talked about it. And one day on a Saturday, I think I was having a little nap on a swing on the porch, and John came and said, "Dad, this is it. We got to do it." And there was a great, huge east wind. I said, "Okay, we got to get a crew." And he got young Stoddard White, I think Don Chubb, and I can't remember the other one. But we had 4 of us on my boat. We tied a ski rope to a vertical member of the boat behind the tillers and dragged it behind us. And then Stoddard Sr. took John out in his motorboat, and we went over and right off behind Camel's boathouse in what we call Camel's Cove, where the wind wasn't, you know, we were sheltered from the wind a bit. John got in the water with 2 skis, and we sailed by, and he grabbed the rope, and then we hardened up and took off, and he got up, and then he kept sinking, but he rose up several times as we crossed the lake, and I knew we could do it. And so then Stoddard picked him up, and I said, "We're going to try again, the wind is even better." And we went back, and on the second try he just popped up, and we took him all the way across the lake, and of course you can't turn around. And so and we got over by the yacht club and dumped him, and all of a sudden horns were blowing, and there were probably 50 motorboats out watching, and I had no idea that was happening, but people had gotten on the phone and calling all around the lake, and they were all out watching us.
Do you have any pictures of it?
Oh yeah, yeah. Stoddard took pictures. I got a picture in here. I'll show you. And that was a great experience.
That's incredible.
And I think about it to this day often how I would do it just a little bit differently the next time. And in fact, I talked to Don about it a couple of times, just what my new ideas are if anybody ever wants to do it.
I would think your grandsons would be all over that. They'd
Oh
want you
yeah,
to
they might.
try again with them.
All right. But you gotta have a good crew, and you have to have some what I'd call seamanship skills to be able to figure it out. And because I was really afraid it was going to break the tillers, because it was so hard to get the boat to fall off. It wanted to come up into the wind. And so when I say I'd do it differently now, I would just harden up on the jib to get it to fall off and get going instead of the main and the jib at the same time. And that's the difference. I've thought of that 1,000 times.
Maybe that could be a water sports day event, huh?
Well, yeah, it's hard on the boat, I think. Yeah, if it isn't, I really was worried I was going to break something.
Yeah. When was the first Shamrock?
Well, let's see. This was 2001, probably 90. I can't.
So you went from Fitzgerald to Sandpiper to Shamrock.
Yeah.
1, 2.
Yeah. Right. And I have a file. It's in Denver, a boat file and all the boats I bought, both motorboats and what I paid for them. And I think the first E was less than, it was maybe $4,500 or something. And today,
That's quite a bit back then.
yeah, today there's $60,000 for the-
60,000?
Yes, sir. Get on the website, Melga's. It's fascinating. I just can't see how people can do it. Particularly here for, somebody like Toby and Jason that sail all over the place. But my gosh, if you're going to keep a boat here, although they last longer.
Fiberglass.
Yeah.
Okay, other than sailing, do you have a favorite Regatta Week event? Something that you always look forward to during Regatta Week?
Oh. I can't say that. Nothing that's really, in the old days, I guess the water sports was really fun. What
were the water sports then?
Well,
you remember?
They had rowboat races and canoe races, and then of course the same stuff they're doing now, the centipede and the tilting. Do they still do tilting?
I don't know what that is.
Oh, well, that was a great event. They had poles with towels wrapped around the end of the poles. Big poles.
Oh, like jousting?
And so the guys would go out in canoes, and there'd be one tilter with a pole and then the paddler. And the contest was to dump the other boat, and the survivor was the winner. And
Sounds like fun.
yeah, it was.
It doesn't sound very PC to me. Very safe.
Well, that's probably why it isn't done anymore, because probably people are worried about liability or something today. But that was fun. A lot of rowboat races, and we talk about the boat service in this picture I showed you, but a lot of people would get, the boat service would furnish their rowboats for the race, the rowboat race. And one of my other favorite boats is I don't know, a Old Town double lender rowboat, and I still have it. And I think it was our 25th wedding anniversary, and we're coming up against 60 now. And
What's a double-ended rowboat?
well, it's a rowboat instead of, two pointed
Points.
ends on it. And
The pointy ends.
yeah, and I still have it. I still row it, and but they had rowboat races, and I took Ted James when he was blind out, and because you'd have two rowers, and had him rowing, and he
So
struggled.
he was rowing.
Yeah.
But you could kind of adjust the course because
Right.
you were also rowing.
Yeah, and that was a great thrill for him, and we did okay. It's a good boat. That was fun. I guess that was my favorite other thing. The Commodore's ball is more of a chore for me than anything. It's too noisy and too many people. And
If you were standing up in front of the members, let's say at the annual meeting or something, and you could just give any sort of word of wisdom or advice or insight to the membership of the Grand Lake Yacht Club, what would you say?
don't make waves.
Don't make waves or go make waves?
No, don't.
Don't make waves.
Uh,
What do you mean by that?
Well, when they're sailing, and particularly in a drifter, some guys go around and several, let's say a number of people with motorboats don't understand that at half speed they're making the biggest wake. And so if it's a slow race, and it's really hard on the sailors, because big waves like that will knock them off course. particularly in the smaller scows like the M16s, and they're affected more than the E's, but all the boats are affected. So anyway, don't make waves. But I can't think of any great words of wisdom except that just how lucky are you? I mean, you just think about what's going on in the world, and we're at this place, and having fun and sailing, and so there's just, I guess, appreciate what you got more than anything.
Was the sailing school around? Did Bruce and John grow up in sailing school?
Just the beginning, really. We had a boat called a Whistler. Do you remember the Whistlers? Yes. And I guess we had 6 or 7 Whistlers around the lake. We even had a junior yacht club for a couple of years, and they were sailing Whistlers, and then that sort of evolved into the sailing school. And my memory is that Howdy Fry was the first sailing school organizer.
Howdy or Sonny? I have
maybe
a
Sonny
memory
was
of Sonny
involved.
Hill.
Could be. Howdy or Bruce would remember that better than I.
But now, what difference do you see with your grandsons having come through?
Well, they
sailing
can do
school?
everything. Today the sailors are so much superior to what I competed against. In all respects, they got better boats, they got better crew. Look at, I was always looking for crew. Look at Toby Sutherland, he's had the same crew for close to 25 years now, I think. And it makes a big difference. But the sailing school, just the kids that are sailing today are just twice as good as they were 40 years ago. And so I think really the best thing that's happened here in the long run is the sailing school. It's just great fun to watch, and it's produced a lot of good sailors. It's taught people not to be afraid of the water, not to be afraid of a sailboat. I think the other great thing are the lasers, and I wish we had more of those. Kids sailing lasers, and adults. A great boat for everybody. A single-hander is fun. But yeah, probably the best thing in my mind that's happened there is sailing school. And, the kids know how to do everything. They get, those grandsons of mine, they can tie every knot there is. They just know what to do on a boat.
Was there a particular Commodore that you looked up to?
Bill Garnsey.
Why?
Well, he was fun. He ran good meetings, knew the history of Grand Lake, knew the history of sailing, was a real competitor. He was just a good guy. Yeah, he would have been the one I'd look up to, yeah. But there's nobody alive now that was Commodore before me. That's just, there's a picture. Do y'all remember a picture of past Commodores at the ball one night? I've got it in the house, and they're all gone. There's some successive ones that are still around. But it's been fun. The yacht club is, still just a nice place. The big change probably is that now we hire a lot of the work done, where in my time we did it, and the wives had to clean the toilets. They talked about that a lot, and we did everything. The tea party was people bringing stuff. The Commodore's wife prepared food. for 2 days in advance, getting ready for the Commodore's blessing of the fleet, commissioning of the fleet, and
that happened at the tea party?
yeah, and you know, I'll tell you another thing. In the earliest time in our existence up here, Ann and I, the sailors' party was held at the winter's home, and the Commodore held the tea at his house. And when my brother was Commodore, the tea party was at our house here. So he was probably 5-6 years ahead of me, maybe 10. And so all of the winter's parties though were at the house, but you know, now we've got. I can remember when we talked about putting a limit on the membership of 80 or 90 members, and now I think we have 180. And so that's the big change. You know, you couldn't do it at anybody's house now unless it was one of these monsters that's growing up around here. I worry we're going to become Vale with some of these new homes. But did I answer your question?
Yes. Actually, that's one of the reasons we're doing what we're doing now.
Yeah.
You know, preserving the
Yeah.
traditions and memories of old-time Grand Lake. And
Sure.
what's come before. Do you have anything else you'd like to share with us? We're kind of at the end of our
I can't think of
prepared questions.
it.
Well, tell us, how do you spend a good summer day now?
Here?
Yeah.
Never run out of things to do. You know, it's maintaining, cobwebs. My God, in the last 4 or 5 years, we have more cobwebs than I've ever seen.
How about black flies?
I haven't seen a lot of flies this
Oh,
year.
we have so many flies. I must kill a dozen flies a day.
Maybe it's because you're near the stable.
No. I think they live in old houses. That's why I'm
Yeah.
asking.
But boy, spiders and cobwebs. But you know, first of all, I have both a kayak and a rowboat. And up until the last 2 or 3 years, I had a little sailboat that I could sail alone or with people. And I can't do that anymore. But I can still kayak, I can still row. I can ride my bicycle, and I play golf probably once a week up here. So I can stay busy maintaining the house, and you know, it's just, but none of it is that. There's nothing that isn't fun.
Yeah.
I used to think about I was 2 people because when we owned a house in Denver, I never did want to do anything. And I got up here and I just loved doing it all. And, it's just something about being up in the mountains, I guess. But, you know, I guess the only other comment I would make about the yacht club in particular just is how families keep coming. Look at your family and yours, and all 3 of you. But boy, I don't know. We got 6 generations, I think, now in my family up here, and they keep coming back. And we recall when we'd come up, and Ann would spend the summer, and I'd commute on the weekends, but we'd drive up here and open the car door, and the kids disappeared. And they were with their friends from up here, and that same thing is happening today. They have a set of friends at Grand Lake and another set of friends wherever they live, Denver or someplace else. And it's just a remarkable thing. We have a granddaughter who lives in Montana, and we brought her here last year. We picked her up at the airport, and we drove into the driveway, and she, you know, today they have these cell phones and they're texting, I guess, and you know, she was gone. she didn't even come in the house. And she was over with the Sutherland girls, and it's just remarkable. And it's how, you know, people told us that when our boys got to high school, they wouldn't want to come up here anymore. But it never happened. They worked here. Both our boys had jobs up here for several summers, and different places. They worked restaurants and contractors and all of that.
Who have been your close friends up here, starting with when you were a kid?
Oh boy, well, when I was a kid.
Well, I mean,
When
I'm
was
thinking of when you started working at
Yeah.
the marina.
Yeah, because when I started working at the marina, there just weren't any other kids my age around, you know, that from Grand Lake. Most of the people that we associated with were a little bit older. They're just right at our age in our early married life. There weren't many people exactly our age. They were several years older, like well, you know, Nancy Harrington's 5 years older. The Everest people were older, and then your brother was a lot younger. He's at least 15 years younger, I guess.
He's 68.
Yeah, so much younger. And so it's hard to say. I don't know. Garnsies were fun. J Man was a lot of fun. The Henrys. I don't know. Did any of you know the Henrys? Yeah. I mean, they were great fun. You didn't want to be around them too much. You ended up in the drunk tank someplace. They were fun people. It's all good folks. There were just a lot of fun people here over the years. Jim Munn was great fun. He was really fun. And, so, Ants and Garnsey, but they weren't here as much, you know, just during regatta week primarily. Stoddard White was a great pal, and you know, Stoddard and I just were thinking about tools, equipment. What was his was mine, and what was mine was his. We didn't ask. If he needed something, he'd come over and get it out of our place, and if I needed something, I went over and got it. And that's just the way it was. We were friends that way. And, so anyway, it's been fun. Been a great life. Very lucky.
Yeah.
Our house, you know, I tell a story that that house has survived a lot of things. The Depression, getting through the Depression was very difficult for my dad, and then my mother got sick and was really in the hospital for most part for 10 months, and that was 1940-41, no insurance, and it just wiped him out. And so I'm the youngest of 4 siblings, and when I graduated from college, my dad said, "Okay, you're now on the mortgage." And the 4 of us kept the house alive and worked on it and maintained it. And fortunately, I've been pretty good with making some money, and everything's going that well now. It's been a great place.
Y'all have any other questions?